is Upbeat with beatboxer, musician, speaker, and show host, Parker Kane.
Hey, welcome to Upbeat, and thank you very much for being here and for listening in today or watching. If you're watching this on YouTube or on the website, parker.kane.co, thank you very much for being here, checking it out. Appreciate you. Today's guest is John Meese. John is an economist turned entrepreneur. He is the CEO of Cowork.Inc., co-founder of Notable, and host of the Thrive School podcast. And he's on a personal mission to help eradicate generational poverty. And he does this by helping business owners and entrepreneurs build thriving businesses, which is why he wrote his book, #1 bestseller, I might add, #1 best-selling book, Survive and Thrive: How to Build a Profitable Business in Any Economy, including this one. And we break that down throughout this episode, which is just absolutely awesome. We talk about the motivation behind writing it, the process, also when he was able to do that. It's kind of important. This was just an awesome episode, and he shares with us so much valuable information, including some of the best tips from the book that he wanted to share with us so we could start implementing those strategies today. So thank you very much for that, John. It was an absolute honor having him here on Upbeat, and I cannot wait for you to hear this episode. Let's get into it. John, thank you very much for joining me on Upbeat. Appreciate you being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
We're excited to learn from you today, and I'm excited to speak with you today and just make this connection. I know that you've started multiple businesses, especially during COVID, and we're going to get into all that, but I really love starting with story and getting to know you and introducing you to the listeners. So if you don't mind just taking a brief 2 or 3 minutes to share with us your story and kind of who John is and what you're up to.
Who am I? Right? That's the question. I'm still working on that one. So my name is John Meese. Meese is in it should be the plural of moose, goose, geese, moose, meese, you would think, but English is not
clever.
Consistent. I'm an author of a book that came out in July. So it's called Survive and Thrive: How to Build a Profitable Business in Any Economy, including this one. And that last part is in the title because it's really important to emphasize the fact that including this one, yes, and even in this economy, which, by the way, no matter when you see that cover on the bookshelves, it's going to be this one, right? So like 5-10 years from now, someone's going to be thinking like, well, surely not in this economy, but it says including this one. So I'm hoping they'll be like, well, maybe they'll take a chance on it. I'm a traditionally trained economist. So I have a degree in economics. I work for an economics research lab, and that was kind of my, the start of my professional career. And along the way, the whole reason why I went to college was actually because I'm a first generation college student, and I come from a family of a history of poor financial decisions. And, in the same way that some families pass on wealth from one generation to the next, my family is part of the many families who passes on poverty from one generation to the next, in terms of not just the lack of money and resources, but also just the mindset, really just the unhealthy mindsets attached to money and work that keep people trapped there. And so I was meant to be the golden boy to kind of break out of that pattern by going to college. And I did. I went to college, got a couple of pieces of paper that say I know some things. And spoiler alert, it didn't really dramatically change my life. Like, in other words, it didn't open a bunch of doors. It didn't do all the things that it was promised to do. And so at first I was really disappointed by that. But then I started looking at okay, well, what does then, right? So if it's not a college degree, maybe once upon a time, the answer was get a college degree and that'll get you a reliable job, but that's no longer the case. So if that's not the case, then what is true of how do you break out of that cycle if you're stuck in that cycle? Because there are people all over the world, not just in America, but definitely in other countries all over the planet, the people who are stuck in this cycle of poverty. And so, that's when I really developed a love for entrepreneurship. Because I started exploring the different options, I realized that, entrepreneurship, even in the way that economists look at entrepreneurs, by the way, economists don't really understand entrepreneurs. They just they track new businesses, and things like that, and new startups, but there's not really a framework for where those come from. They just come from market demand, and things like that. But the reality is that that's not, the full story. But entrepreneurship is a great equalizer. Your business doesn't care your race, your ethnicity, your age, your gender, whether you have $5 or $5,000 in the bank. Your business doesn't care. Your customers don't even really care. All they really care about is, can you create a real solution to a real problem for real people? And I fell in love with that. And so I've made it my personal mission to eradicate generational poverty by helping entrepreneurs create thriving businesses. And by the way, thriving businesses, that means not just businesses that are profitable, although yes, that's part of it, but also businesses that, more importantly, fuel your life. It's not enough to work 60, 80-hour weeks and to raise a bunch of money to build some billion-dollar startup and lose your key relationships and your values along the way. And so I'm married. I have 3 beautiful young children, all boys. And that's just, the motivation behind everything I do is like, okay, I'm a provider. Like, how do I go out there and build a business that's going to help them? So I've built 3 businesses from scratch. And I've also worked with other people to help scale their businesses, both as a consultant and also with Michael Hyatt specifically. I was on his leadership team for a little over 3 years, building a membership site called Platform University, where we scaled that and then sold that to a third party. It was a multi-million-dollar acquisition. And so that was like my foray into that whole world, which is a whole different story. But so now I run Cowork.Inc. as my core company. And that's, I'm in it right now. We have a co-working space component to our business. We actually have physical co-working spaces. But also I have a Thrive School podcast. If you like podcasts, check it out. Thrive School, email newsletter, and then this book and more books to come.
Awesome. I love the breakdown. It sounds like you're up to a lot, and all for really great reasons. I really relate to what you share about generational poverty, because that's something in my family. Like my sister and I were the first of our family to go to college, and similar experiences as you. We got out of college, we had our degrees, and we're like, this didn't do anything. Like,
what now? Yeah. There goes 4 years of my life, or at least 4. Yeah.
Yeah. 4, a bunch of money. And now I'm working on all my own stuff anyway. And so I guess, what are some of your best tips for people, maybe even regardless of age, like whether you just graduated college or whether you're 50 years old and you've been kind of doing this same, just get a job and work there until you retire plan? Like what are some things people can do to kind of break that barrier? And obviously it's going to be in your book too, but if you just want to shed light on anything that could help someone break that barrier.
That's a great question. Well, I think the first thing I would say is that it's easier to start a business today than it ever has been. It requires, maybe $10 for a domain name. It's like, it's so cheap and easy to start a business today compared to even 10 or 20 years ago. And yet, up until 2019, the US was at a 40-year low in terms of new entrepreneurs, which is kind of weird because actually entrepreneurship is weirdly glorified in our culture right now. Like celebrities like Elon Musk are on the same level as Oprah. Entrepreneurs are like the celebrities of today. And yet, like everyday entrepreneurship, not the billion-dollar Silicon Valley companies, but everyday entrepreneurs, the small business owners, that was at a 40-year low in 2019. Now, thankfully, right now in 2021, we reversed that. And so we just had 2 consecutive quarters of breaking records in terms of new businesses started in the US. And that's a wonderful thing. Let's continue that. So, I think the first thing I would say is that it's counterintuitive when you get into business, because of course you want to make money from what you're doing. You should. There's nothing wrong with that. You should have no shame in wanting to get paid for the work you do. And yet, the path to success in entrepreneurship, the path to profits, is through serving people. And so in my book, I call this the entrepreneur's paradox, that entrepreneurs get paid, but they don't work for money. Like you have to get into entrepreneurship. You have to have at the core of your business a purpose. Now, and I actually walk through, I actually teach a framework for how to create a purpose statement in your business. But the simplest version of that is to say, I help insert real people here, solve real problem with real solution. And it's can seem like an oversimplification. And also you're like, why are you saying the word real over and over again? Well, that's intentional. It's a psychological trigger, because it's so often when people are looking at creating a unique value proposition statement or unique selling proposition statement, or just like a mission statement for their company, any of those things, it's easy to get caught in sort of like platitudes and fake ideas where, you forget that there are real human beings with dreams, aspirations, hopes, fears, kids, sleepless nights, jobs on the other side of your business. A lot of businesses, when they first get started, they lose this very quickly. They don't intentionally throw out the fact that they're serving humans. They just start counting everything in terms of how many followers do I have, how many likes do I have, how many shares, how many customers, how many sales, which aren't necessarily bad things to measure, but pretty quickly people forget that those are real life human beings on the other side. And so they begin so focused on the products that they become all about selling products instead of solving problems. The products and services you have in your business, that's your solution to somebody's problem. But you need to make sure that you understand really well what problems people have before you try to match that to the solution. You probably heard the phrase, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I mean, it's kind of like that when you have, as a business owner, if all you have are a core set of products, you're going, okay, now who can I sell these to? Then you're kind of trying to force it. Versus if you start first with, okay, who are the real people that I'm going to serve? And you get to understand them enough that you can unlock your human superpower of empathy, and then understand, okay, well, what are the real problems they have in their life? What are the problems? When they wake up at 2 a.m. sweating, staring at the ceiling, what are they worried about? How can you help them remove that problem from their life? Those kind of things. Then your solution becomes obvious of what your products or services should be. It becomes inevitable. So that's the first thing I would say.
Awesome. Well, that was like a mini masterclass, basically. Definitely, listeners, if you need to rewind that and listen to that part again, take notes, and obviously as well, go check out his book. That's like a little taste probably of the 200 pages that are your book. And there's probably so much more that you dive into, as well as with other people. That's one thing too I wanted to at least mention was, I love that your book references or collabs with so many other entrepreneurs who I'm familiar with. I think that's really cool.
Well, actually, and that was intentional because honestly, well, I'll tell you this. So Parker, back up to like March 2020, I opened a brand new co-working space in January, and 58 days later it was closed by executive order. Not a great start, right? Now, obviously I'm still in the co-working space. It's doing fine. But at the time that wasn't clear and obvious. It was not really sure what was going to happen. And so I started freaking out for a minute, but then I backed up and I said, well, wait a minute, what's the purpose of my business? Well, it's to help entrepreneurs create thriving businesses. Well, maybe a co-working space is not the best way for me to help people in my community right now, but what do they need? And I started looking at and realizing people needed a playbook that they could reference that gave them a step-by-step guide to succeeding regardless of what the economy is doing. So I sat down and my co-working space was closed by executive order, but I could still get in myself in the side door. So I had a 2,000 square foot co-working space to myself where I was just writing every day. And I wrote the first draft of this book, Survive and Thrive. And when I wrote the first draft of it, I thought, okay, this is pretty good, but it's not enough just to reference my experience. Yes, I built 3 different companies. I built a, coaching and online course company. I built a software company. I've started to build a co-working space company, but there's so much more than that I don't have experience with. And so I reached out to several dozen of really my mentors in business, people that I consider some of the best and brightest minds in business today, and interviewed all of them about what are they doing in their business and what have they found to be this pattern of how do they succeed themselves, but also what are their customers doing. So people like Michael Hyatt, Ray Edwards, Philip Stutz, Mike Michalowicz, Robert Daniel Lappin, Casey Graham. I interviewed about 30 of these entrepreneurs who are all incredibly successful in completely different industries. And then I transcribed all those interviews and went back and looked at that and I said, okay, what are the common themes? And that's what I pulled out, and that's what this book is. So you can actually go on the Thrive School podcast and you can go back and listen to every one of those interviews if you want. But I actually distilled out of those, what are the 9 different things you need to do in your business? What are the 9 different strategies that we need to cover? And then that's what the book is. It walks you through that. So if I love this. One of the first early reviews of the book we got was from a reader saying that it was like a weekend MBA, which is ironic considering my opinion of higher education. But I do think that it's really that's a great description of it. Is saying look, if you don't really know, maybe you know a little bit about business, but there's holes in your knowledge. Or maybe you don't know anything about business and you're just thinking about starting or scaling your business. Well, then this book will walk you through sales, marketing, and finance, the 3 most important areas in your business that help you get people's attention, turn those into customers, and then manage that money well so that you can pay yourself and build a profitable business from scratch. By the way, the assumption here in this book is that you don't need investor funding. You don't need to go to the bank and get a $50,000 loan. You don't need to go to some venture capital investor and get them to write you $1 million check. That's a different path. This book is more about saying, with the resources you have right now, how do you build a profitable business?
I think that's really brilliant, and I think it's something people definitely need right now. So you're on the spot with that, on the nose with that one. I do want to say too, this kind of a side tangent, so we could touch on it just briefly, but the grind that you have to be able to reach out to all those people and then get their attention and then get them on your podcast and being recorded. You know, a lot of people, I'm a podcast producer, and one thing that I come across with people's concerns oftentimes is, well, how am I ever going to find anybody to interview? And more importantly than finding anybody to interview, like, how am I going to find those big name people, and how am I going to actually get them on my podcast? So if you want to share just briefly, like, what you did to land all those awesome entrepreneur mentors.
Oh, sure. Well, I don't have a cheat code or a hack to offer you, unfortunately. I think, I will say you and I connected via Podmatch, and that's a great resource for podcast hosts or guests to connect. So you can check out my Podmatch profile if you want. You can just go to johnmeese.com/podmatch and it takes you there. And that's a great resource, but I would say that's probably, no offense to either you or I, Parker, but that's probably like a B-list podcaster platform, where like not an A-list podcast platform. You know what I mean? Like, in other words, like the really big, like top podcast hosts, the top best-selling authors, the most sought after guests, they're not really on that platform. But there's lots of incredibly successful authors, experts, psychologists, neuroscience, and that kind of stuff who are on there. So you can find people in your niche and invite them to be a guest on your podcast, which is pretty cool. But a lot of the people that I interviewed are people who are kind of hard to get a hold of. So what I did was I spent 5 years building relationships. I mean, so that's like, there's no cheat code here. And I talk about this in my book, that like relationships really lead to results. And so as part of your business strategy, you need to prioritize relationships with your customers to actually have a relationship with them, but also with peers and mentors in your industry. And so for me, I've spent the last 5 years getting to know a lot of these people. So I worked for 3 years on Michael Hyatt's leadership team. I worked for him. I met Ray Edwards at a conference and just built up a relationship with him over several years. I never asked anything. I just built that relationship by, commenting on his stuff, emailing him, eventually texting him, those kind of things. Pat Flynn announced that he's going to have a conference. I'm one of the first person to buy a ticket and to be there. And he says, "Oh my gosh, John, I so appreciate how you've always showed up. I remember when you used to comment on my blog posts 5 years ago." Part of it's just like consistency. And so a lot of these people I had just developed a relationship with. I mean, Casey Graham has built an incredibly successful company in gravy. But when he was just starting Gravy, I had met him after he sold another company, and he was one of those people we all get. Well, a lot of people get requests like this where he said, "Hey, can we meet up for coffee?" I didn't charge him anything for it. We had a little bit of a strategy conversation there at the table where he said, "Oh my gosh, I think you just dramatically changed the course of our business." I didn't charge him for that because I knew that there'd be a day when I would need a favor. And so, well, actually, that's not why I didn't charge him. I mean, like, I don't keep a tally of like who owes me favors. But when the time came where I was like, I need to get these people's attention, and I reached out to them, I already had either their phone number or a private email address or just enough recognition with them and their team that it wasn't very difficult to get them. I only got one, I'm not trying to brag here, but just because you asked about it, I only got one no. So when I made my target list of guests for the podcast, I only got, actually, no, I take it back. I got one no response, one no, and one not right now. So Tim Tosopoulos, who is the senior vice president of operations for Chick-fil-A, runs the entire company for the entire $10 billion company for the Chick-fil-A. He said, "I would love to. I'm just really busy right now." As you could imagine, in the middle of a pandemic when like Chick-fil-A's dining rooms are closed and that kind of stuff. And he's like, "Hey, could we maybe schedule a little bit farther out?" So that was the not yet. I did not hear from Marcus Lemonis. I did not hear back from him, who's the host of The Prophet, and I really wanted to interview him, but I did not hear back from him. I also kind of expected that. And then I got one no from Gino Wickman, who wrote the book Traction and several other books. And he has specific criteria for when he accepts an interview. Like, he won't accept an interview, and he'll tell you that right away, unless you get it like at least 50,000 downloads on each episode of your podcast. And this podcast didn't exist yet. I was literally just like interviewing people before the podcast existed. So there were 0 downloads. So yeah, I got 1 no, 1 not right now, and 1 no response. But otherwise, I knew who to reach out to because they were my real life mentors. I'd already built relationships with these people.
Awesome. That's really, really great networking tips right there. Just to be present, get involved, be consistent. Yeah. That's something we all have to be working on, and it'll work wonders, not even when you expect it. It'll always come back to help you tenfold later on. Maybe not right at the moment, but absolutely. Well, I love that. And I did want to touch too, you've created these businesses, wrote this book all during the pandemic. I want to know what was going through your mind to, I guess, double down and work harder rather than, slack off and go watch Netflix throughout the whole lockdown.
Yeah. Some people got really into Tiger King or learn how to bake sourdough bread. And I wrote a book, number bestseller in direct marketing. So that turned out okay. I think it comes back to the purpose statement. I mean, I'm not trying to like just be an echo chamber here, but like this having that clarity of like selling co-working is not working right now. A lot of the things that I was doing didn't make sense. But rather than just like sit back up and say like, well, I could probably get a PPP loan and that'll cover some expenses and all this kind of stuff, I looked around and said, okay, what's my purpose statement? My purpose statement is I help entrepreneurs create thriving businesses. Okay, with what? Well, with training and tools. I'm like, okay, well, all right. Or on the tool side, I've got a software company called Notable. And so we built a brand new content creation platform for creators. So like podcasters like yourself, YouTubers, bloggers. We have a platform called Notable Press, which you can learn about at notable.press, which is basically a superpowered WordPress theme that allows you to publish your content, also build your email list and monetize it too by having members only content that's paid behind a wall. So we created that. We started doing live videos every single week. Me and my co-founder, Thomas McGee, who also lives in Boise, Idaho, where you live, Parker. We did that every single week. We did a live video with our audience to just ask them, what do you need right now? What are you looking for? And we started building this platform out and literally sharing it with him when he was like rough and broken of like, here's a beta version. What do you think? Well, it really was like an alpha version. So that's on the tool side of what I do. We focused on creating that platform. On the training side, I wrote this book. I created a new podcast, the Thrive School podcast, which is free training. And all that came back to the purpose statement of like why I'm in business. So I think, that's just, I cannot overemphasize like how important that is. Now I teach a lot more in this book in terms of more than just creating your purpose statement. But like, if you don't do that, nothing else really matters, because when the going gets tough, your business is going to crumble, or you are going to crumble just because you don't have clarity. By the way, a friend of mine, Curtis Morley, who's also got a book called The Entrepreneur's Paradox, which is ironically the name of the first chapter of my book, but our books came out at the same time, so we didn't know that. But Curtis Morley, he often states, he'll point out, which this stat is true, is you can find this anywhere online, that, most businesses, more than 50% of businesses close within the first 5 years. I mean, they just don't last more than 5 years. But the reality is, he likes to say this, and I think this is really smart, so I'm going to quote him on this. He says, the reality is businesses don't close, entrepreneurs quit. I'm going to say that again. Businesses don't close or go out of business. Entrepreneurs quit. Because an entrepreneur's job is to solve problems for a profit. And when the going gets tough or something doesn't go as planned, or you don't have the right systems in place, and you walk away from that, then you close a business. But the business closing is a symptom of the entrepreneur quitting. And so that's why your purpose statement is so crucial, because you're going to have to push through some hard times to be able to have the wealth generation and the lucrative success that is possible for entrepreneurs. But it's not guaranteed.
I really, really love that. So thank you very much for sharing. And just everyone listening, work on building your purpose statements and go get his book to help you do that. I have one more question before we get into this kind of last closing segment. But before we do, just where's the best? I guess there maybe isn't a best, but where would you recommend people go get your book?
Well, if you go to surviveandthrivebook.com, of course, you'll find links there to where you can find the book on Amazon, Audible, Apple Books, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, all those places where you buy books, wherever you buy books. But you'll also find there a form where you can actually download for free a fill in the blank playbook. And for those who are on video, I can show you what it looks like, but if you're on the podcast, you just have to imagine it. But it's a 1-page business plan, essentially. It's a playbook that goes along with the book that you can download for free as a PDF to fill in to create your strategy for thriving, in your business. And so that's a free resource, which you can download right there alongside where you can also purchase the book at surviveandthrivebook.com.
Awesome. Definitely go do it, everyone. And John, just before we get to this last closing segment, I had kind of a curiosity question, and that is, in my research, trying to learn more about you before this interview, I stumbled on another podcast episode where you mentioned you're writing more books, and you've got one about the creator economy. And that's obviously being a podcast creator, and I guess musician, beatboxer, that's always where my head's at. And so I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are on what is the creator economy. Like, that is just, but in and of itself, something that kind of confuses people. And then where do you think it is right now? What are your thoughts on where you think it's going?
Oh my gosh. Well, how much time we have to talk about that? Like an hour?
It could be a whole other episode.
I could probably condense it for an hour. No, well, I'm excited about that. Obviously I built one of my companies, Notable, is built entirely on the back of serving the creator economy. So I'm definitely excited about the growth there. Here's the thing. Over the last 50 years, our world has dramatically shifted. Of course, you're like, no duh. 50 years is a long time, John. That was smartphones, the internet, computers, all of that. Yes. But take all the technology out of it for a minute. Before 1980, then the entire world of information was controlled by gatekeepers. And so if you wanted to publish a book, you had to go through one of a core dozen or so publishers who had access to bookstores. If you wanted to, publish, if you wanted to just be heard at a pulpit, you had to get approved by a bishop or a priest somewhere. If you wanted to, get into politics, you had to make it past the guard, essentially the old guard, and get their approval. No matter what industry, there were always gatekeepers in place, and very few of them. With the dawn of the internet, we went into the information age. The role of the gatekeeper kind of eroded pretty quickly, where all of a sudden you could publish anything, even if it's crazy or if it's awesome. You could publish anything and no one can stop you. And then all of a sudden that opened this floodgate to this massive flood of information spreading all over the world, person to person, without gatekeepers. Now, at first it was very exciting because all of a sudden, you had computer scientists publishing, theories about, how the world works right alongside, psychologists and, and armchair philosophers like, Aunt Susie. So you had all of this going on, and it got to the point where it became very overwhelming. And so, now most of our energy is spent ignoring information, headlines, emails, notifications, text messages, billboards. We're bombarded with information so much so that we just take it for granted that it's everywhere, even though that's a new thing. And we're overwhelmed by it. And so that is why we're right now, as we speak, in the midst of shifting on a global basis, shifting from the age of information to the age of insight. Now, the age of insight is spurred by this desire from everyday people. Everyone on the planet is going, I cannot become the expert on everything in my life. I need to find people that I trust and respect, who have experience and wisdom to filter information and tell me what are the 3 things I need to know. So when it comes to losing weight, what are the 3 things I need to know? When it comes to, fixing a, leaky faucet in my house, what are the 3 things I need to know? When it comes to growing my business, what are the 3 things I need to know? And so yes, there are plenty of you could search any one of those things, and there are literally 10 million results on Google of how to fix your faucet or grow your business or lose weight. But we're not interested in that. We're interested in the distilled insight. And that is where creators come in, because creators, creators are the not really a gatekeeper. They're the new guides who filter that information, where it's an opt-in system where you can pick someone that you trust and follow them to learn from them. And so I think we're just at the beginning of that shift. And by the way, that's not original. The World Economic Forum came out last year and said, hey, the age of information just ended. The age of insight just begun. But that's a long shift. That's not something that happens overnight. So I think the reality is that the need to have individual creators creating content that's useful in different industries and different very specific niches is really still completely untapped. Think about if you have a very specific, maybe you have an allergy to a very specific rare kind of mold, and you ask your doctor about it, and he's like, I don't know, I read a paper once that says mold can do this one thing, and you're like, no, like this is a life altering thing for me. I need to know how to identify the mold, how to remove it, how to treat it. Well, there's enough people on the planet that have a similar enough condition that if one guide can step up to the plate and be the creator that helps serve that audience, then they're going to solve a real problem in your life. You're going to love them for it, pay them for it, and a lot of other people will too. So I do actually have a second book. It's not published yet, but you can actually get like a pre-release copy on my website. If you go to alwaysbeteaching.com, that's actually where you can get a pre-release copy of Always Be Teaching, which is an illustrated book on 50 illustrated insights on how to grow your business by creating content online. So that's my book that you're referring to that's on the creator economy. So it hasn't been published yet, but you can get a pre-release copy on my website if you're interested.
Awesome. Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to do that. That whole topic fascinates me, and it definitely could be another hour's worth of conversation, breaking it down. And I'm thankful that you touched on it there for a few minutes, and thanks for being on this podcast too. I've got one last little segment of faster questions, and then I'm going to do some beatboxing. And then
I'm looking forward to that. I've heard about this beatboxing thing. It's going to happen.
Awesome. Well, thanks. Let's get to it. John, what makes you upbeat?
Just life. It's so full of it. I mean, like life is given to us, but we get to choose whether to live or not. And so I try to live with the life I've got.
Love it. Who is your number one influence or inspiration?
I know it's cheesy, but it's true. Christ. I'm an Eastern Orthodox Christian, and there's just such a richness and depth to the life that Christ lived and the guidance that he left for us that he's definitely my greatest inspiration.
Awesome. What music do you listen to stay upbeat and motivated?
I really like a few different, I would say right now I'm listening to a playlist on Spotify that's called Folk Pop, which is like a fun crossover. So I've really enjoyed that one. But actually every single morning I listen to Awesome Mix Volumes 1 and 2 from Guardians of the Galaxy. That's like my start the day playlist. So that's a good one. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting too, because I know you're near Nashville, so you've been around music a ton.
Oh yes, by the way, in this area, you don't ask someone. You don't say, "Hey, do you play any instruments?" You just say, you meet someone and you say, "Oh, what do you play?" That's just kind of like it's assumed that you play something. In case you're wondering, I play ukulele, mandolin, and fiddle. Yeah.
Awesome. So. Thank you. Okay. What's your favorite word?
I don't know why this occurred to me when you said that. No, my favorite word is definitely thrive. I mean, obviously, that's my whole brand, my whole business is built around that. I'll tell you why I love that word. The short version is that if you imagine something thriving, like imagine a plant that's thriving, and immediately your mind conjures this plant that's like green and luscious, and there's fruit and surrounded by other good life, and it's just such a good metaphor for life that I try to apply that to business and personal life.
Love it. Do you have a favorite social media platform, and where would you recommend people follow you and connect with you?
Well, in 2019, I deleted all of them. And I've talked about that in other podcasts and on my blog, but I have since gotten back onto LinkedIn. I do like LinkedIn. You can actually go to meese.link if you want to find me. That'll take you straight to my LinkedIn profile. Please connect, say hey. But I like LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again for being on Upbeats. And I'll close this out by putting your name in a beatbox.
Okay.
Let me change this setting real quick on Zoom because sometimes it doesn't come through. With John Meese. John Meese. With John Meese.
That's awesome.
Awesome. Thanks for being on Upbeat. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Parker. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. So there you have it, my interview with John Meese. And of course, we'd both love to connect with you. You can find me at my website, parkerkane.co, parkerkane.co, and John on LinkedIn or at his website, surviveandthrivebook.com. And I would definitely recommend going to that website, surviveandthrivebook.com, because that's where you can get his new book. If you enjoyed this episode or got value from this episode, then please share it with a friend and leave an upbeat review. That is always so much appreciated. You're the best. I'll see you next week.
This is Upbeat with beatboxer, musician, speaker, and show host, Parker Kane. Subscribe at parkerkane.co.